The pendulum inside the antique clock was mid-swing when she said it, not dramatic, not loud, just clean like slicing a piece of fruit. "I want a divorce," Julia announced, arms folded like she was trying to keep herself from shaking. Mark didn't look up right away. He finished adjusting the brass wheel with the precision screwdriver, twisted it once more to be sure, then finally raised his eyes to hers. "Okay," he said. No gasp, no confusion, no begging. Just one word, like he'd been expecting it, or worse, like he didn't care. She blinked, thrown off. "That's it?" Mark stood up without a word, walked past her into the hallway, and opened the bottom drawer of the filing cabinet. It creaked. He didn't hurry. He pulled out a sealed envelope and handed it to her with the same motion he'd used to pass a church bulletin. Inside, signed divorce papers. Dated last week. No fight, no pleading, just his signature. Already notarized. The color left her face. You could almost see the script she'd rehearsed die mid-sentence. Her lips parted, but no words came. For the first time in years, it was Julia who didn't know what to say. He just nodded once and said, "You said it first. If you're listening to this, take a second to subscribe. Most don't, and it honestly helps more than you know. Keeps the stories coming. Helps the team behind them keep pushing." She held the papers like they were radioactive. Her hands trembled slightly. Not enough for her to admit it, but enough for him to notice. She had expected resistance, emotion, maybe a breakdown, but not this, not calm, and definitely not preparedness. "Wait," she said, scanning the date again. "You signed these last week?" Mark just returned to his clock as if her question was rhetorical. The ticking filled the silence like an old metronome mocking the beat of a fading marriage. "You knew?" He tilted his head. "You've been dialing down your affection like a thermostat in a guest room no one uses. I assumed you were either plotting an exit or developing a personality disorder. This seemed more probable." Julia opened her mouth to lash back, but nothing clever came out. That, too, was unusual. She always had something, a jab, a snide remark, an upper hand. Not today. "This isn't how people react," she said quietly. Mark raised an eyebrow. "Maybe not the people you rehearse with." She flinched. That one landed. He wasn't supposed to know. Not about Denise, not about the wine-fueled pep talks over speakerphone while he watered the azaleas outside the kitchen window, not about the smug advice on how to break him without looking like the villain. But he did. He'd known for months, maybe even a year. Knew that Denise had never liked him, always saw him as some boring artifact from a simpler time, useful, loyal, but ultimately forgettable. And Julia, she'd grown into that narrative like a woman trying on a coat she couldn't afford 10 years ago, but now fit like it was made for her. He could hear Denise's voice in his memory. "Tell him you want a divorce. He'll beg. Trust me, men like him always do. They crack under pressure. Then you've got all the leverage." Julia hadn't noticed the way his routines had changed. The late nights in the garage, not the office. The missing folders from the bookshelf. The quiet calls to people she didn't know he knew. People who lived in states with better trust laws and fewer reporting requirements. He didn't yell when she asked, didn't even ask why. He'd already mourned the death of their marriage when she started calling him Mark instead of Han. When she stopped laughing at his jokes. When she came home from her Pilates class and smelled like men's cologne she couldn't name. So no. He didn't react. He executed. Julia's breath caught. So what now? He looked up from the gears and springs of the clock, met her eyes with a stillness that unnerved her more than any tantrum could have. "Now," he said, "you get what you asked for, and I get the rest of my life back." That's when the antique clock chimed. Once, twice, then silence. It was the way she laughed that did it, not Julia, Denise. That nasal, condescending laugh that always managed to hit just the right frequency to make Mark feel like he'd stepped in something and tracked it through the house. He wasn't even eavesdropping that day. He had gone into the kitchen to fix the sink cabinet door, same cabinet Julia said she'd call someone for months ago. Of course she hadn't. She didn't ask him to fix things anymore. Not because she didn't need them fixed, but because she didn't want to admit he was still useful. He was crouched behind the island when her voice floated in from the patio. Phone on speaker, glass of wine in hand, Denise chirping through the airwaves like a parrot on caffeine. "I'm telling you, he'll fold," Julia said. "He always does, when I'm serious. Remember when I threatened to go to that writing retreat alone? Oh, please, Denise laughed. You've got him wrapped around your finger. Just push. He's one of those silent types. Stews in the corner, apologizes the next day. He'll cry maybe, if you're lucky. Mark tightened the hinge. Not a muscle moved in his face, not even a blink. He's not going anywhere, Julia added. He doesn't know how. That night, Mark sat alone in his study, the blue folder open on the desk. Inside were the first steps. The cabin in the Adirondacks, the one her family always bragged about at Christmas, was now titled under a Shell LLC based in Wyoming. The name on the document, not his, not hers. Just a quiet little company with an operating agreement that left no loose ends. Next came the investment accounts, the ones they never discussed. Julia never cared for numbers. Just comfort. Mark, on the other hand, had spent decades working in quiet corners of the tech sector, consulting on back-end infrastructure for companies most people never heard of, but which now powered most of their daily lives. He had taken the slow road, conservative funds, dividend stocks, no crypto, no noise, boring, solid, invisible. Now all of it was being rerouted, not hidden. That would be illegal, but protected. Shifted into trusts that Julia couldn't crack, not without keys she didn't know existed. He didn't do it with anger. He did it like a man packing a parachute. He remembered the time she forgot their anniversary, the excuses. I've just had so much going on, Mark. Work, the charity auction, Denise is going through stuff. Always Denise, like a virus embedded in their marriage. It had started with Pilates, then book club, then girls' weekends. The last one had run 5 days and returned with Julia wearing perfume she said was a free sample but didn't remember the name of. He didn't accuse, he documented. There was no confrontation, no drama, just quiet shifts, names removed from titles, beneficiaries updated, a few notarized forms sent through certified mail to offices and places with better tax codes and fewer questions. The next morning he made her coffee, just the way she liked it. Almond milk, 2 stevia, cinnamon on top. She didn't thank him, didn't even look at him. She was already texting. He watched her thumbs move over the screen like she was solving something urgent. Probably wasn't, but the way her smile curved as she replied to someone, not him, said more than any confession could. Later that week, she accidentally forwarded him an email meant for Denise. Subject. His reaction was nothing. I feel like I'm married to drywall. He didn't reply. Instead, he'd booked a consultation with a lawyer whose client list didn't include divorces, only people who wanted to make sure their legacies ended exactly where they intended. Mark walked into the office with a paper folder and walked out with a plan. That night, Julia kissed his cheek while passing behind him on the couch, a reflex more than affection, like petting a dog who might growl if ignored. Mark turned off the TV, walked to the hallway closet, pulled out an old metal box. Inside, the deed to the rental duplex in Colorado. She never asked about it, never cared that he'd bought it in his own name before they were married. It wasn't the money that mattered now. It was the symbolism. Brick at a time, he was taking apart the life she thought she controlled. She had no idea. She was still listening to Denise. You just have to own the moment, Denise had told her. Make him feel small. That's how you win. Mark didn't want to win. He wanted out. But he'd be damned if he walked out empty-handed. The restaurant was the kind that tried too hard. Reclaimed wood, Edison bulbs, brunch menus with items like avocado smash and carrot foam. Julia chose it because Denise liked to feel upscale when she gave advice. Advice that, until now, Julia had followed like scripture. She arrived late, on purpose, hair done, wearing sunglasses she didn't need. Denise was already on her second mimosa, swirling it with the same manicured finger she used to point at other women's husbands. Julia slid into the booth, dropped her purse too hard, and said nothing for a moment. Well, Denise chirped, did he do the speech? You know, the dramatic what did I do wrong routine? Julia took a long sip of wine before answering. She didn't even order, just drank what was already waiting. He just stood there, she finally muttered. Denise tilted her head. Stood there? Didn't flinch, didn't argue, just handed me the papers. There was a pause. A subtle one, not long, but enough to cut through the brunch music. Denise's smirk dropped half an inch. Wait, she said. Papers? Julia nodded, fingers tightening around the wine glass stem. Already signed, she whispered. Denise blinked. Julia tried to laugh. It came out brittle. I thought he'd freak, break down. You said he would, remember? The whole he'll beg thing? Denise leaned back, suddenly less smug. That doesn't make sense. Men like Mark, they don't walk away. They stew, then grovel. You sure he didn't rehearse that? Maybe it's a bluff. Julia's hand was shaking slightly. She set the glass down, ignoring the small splash of red across the white tablecloth. I don't think it is, she said. There was something in his eyes. Not anger, not sadness. Just gone, like I was talking to a doorman or a dentist. No spark, like I was noise. Denise sat back, checked her phone too quickly, masking discomfort with distraction. He's probably trying to scare you, get the upper hand. But Julia knew something was off. It wasn't just the reaction or lack of one. It was how ready he was, how calm. He didn't stall. He didn't ask for time. He didn't even pretend to be confused. He had that envelope waiting. He knew, Julia said quietly. He was waiting for me to say it. Meanwhile, across town, Mark sat in a quiet office with no receptionist and no windows. The attorney, Marcus Dunning, looked like someone who had never owned a necktie in his life. Jeans, flannel, gray beard, but the diplomas behind him were real. Harvard Law, Georgetown Business, and the books lining the wall weren't there for show. Titles on private equity structuring, offshore entities, asset migration. Mark opened a folder and laid it on the table. Dunning didn't ask many questions, just nodded slowly as he read. You're early, he said finally. Mark raised an eyebrow. Is that a problem? No, rare though. Most guys show up after the fire. You're here before the match is lit. I like to know where the exits are. Dunning smiled. Then let's draw the map. Back at the restaurant, Julia swirled the dregs of her wine, trying to recapture the cocky certainty she'd walked in with. Denise was already rerouting her strategy. Okay, fine, she said. Let's assume he was ready. That just means you push harder, make him sweat, hit him where it hurts, assets, social circle, take the house, humiliate him. But Julia didn't respond. Something else was gnawing at her. A tiny itch in the back of her mind. Why didn't he react? She had prepped for every outcome. Anger? She'd play the victim. Tears? She'd offer distance. Rage? She'd twist it into justification. But this void? She wasn't prepared for that. Denise leaned in, voice low. You have to make it messy. That's the only way to break a man like that. Quiet types only snap when the walls start closing in. Julia nodded slowly, but something inside her shifted. Because she realized he's not the one in the corner. She is. And the walls? They were already moving. The bank had that sterile smell Julia always hated, recycled air, printer ink, and the faint suggestion of disappointment. She clicked her heels harder than usual as she crossed the tile floor, like the sound alone could remind everyone she didn't belong in lines or behind glass. She was above this, or so she thought. The teller greeted her with a polite, tired smile. Young, bland, unmemorable, the kind of person you ignore at charity galas. Julia handed over her ID with the same expression she reserved for dry cleaning staff. I'd like to review the activity on our joint account. Last name Garrison. First name Julia. My husband, Mark, should be on it as well. The girl typed, clicked, squinted, then frowned. I'm not seeing any active joint accounts under your name, ma'am. Julia straightened. That's impossible. It's been our primary for 20 years. More typing. Then the girl turned her monitor slightly, showing the screen like it was a second opinion. It was closed 6 months ago, she said carefully. According to the system, it was closed by mutual request. Both parties signed off. Julia blinked. Excuse me? The girl nodded. We have documentation on file, dated June 12th. Signatures from both of you. Julia's voice dropped into that cold register she used when she wanted to control a room. I never signed anything. The girl hesitated. It was submitted digitally. We have the records. Julia didn't wait for a printout. She spun on her heel and marched back to her car. Her pulse was up. Her skin felt tight. Too hot. June 12th. 6 months ago. What else had he done back then? When she got home, Mark was in the backyard, trimming the hedges. Calm. Routine. Like the world wasn't fraying under her heels. She didn't wait. Just burst through the patio door and spat it at him. The bank says you closed our joint account 6 months ago. What the hell did you do? He didn't even look surprised. Didn't even pause his snipping. I've been listening for a while, he said. I just finally acted. Her mouth opened and closed. What does that mean? Mark turned to face her, clipper still in hand. It means you've had one foot out the door since last Thanksgiving. I just moved the rug so you wouldn't trip on the way out. She stood there, stunned. Then, like a machine rebooting, she grabbed her phone and stormed back inside, slamming the door with just enough force to make it personal. Her lawyer picked up on the second ring. Gavin, I need you to pull the titles. All the properties, now. He sounded confused. Julia, you sure you want to? Now, Gavin, everything we own, every property in both names. Something's wrong. She didn't wait for a reply. An hour later, he called back. I've got the reports, he said. You're not going to like this. Try me. Well, first off, the investment condo downtown transferred into an LLC in March, owner listed as Griffin Valley Holdings. Mark's name is attached to the trust behind the LLC. You're not. That was in my name. Was, Gavin said. She gripped the counter. The lake house? Same story. Different LLC, different trust. All legit. Dates check out. Clean paperwork. Any properties left in both names? Just the primary residence. Everything else is gone. Julia stared at the tiles. The grout lines blurred. She felt like she was standing on a cliff made of sand. How long's he been planning this? She asked, barely audible. Looks like a year, maybe more. She ended the call. Later that night, Mark reheated soup. Chicken and rice, nothing special. The kind he used to make when she had migraines. He placed a bowl in front of her without asking. She didn't touch it. He sat down across from her, folded his hands, and stared at the table. I thought we had rules, she said, not looking up. We did, he replied, until you changed the game. Julia finally raised her eyes. You ambushed me. No, Mark said calmly. I watched you prepare your speech. I gave you the stage, then I walked out the back door while you were still adjusting your spotlight. She wanted to scream, wanted to break something, but there was no scene to make, no one to play to, just the sound of the spoon in his bowl and the creak of her own chair as she sat back. Outside, the sprinklers clicked on, and for the first time in her adult life, Julia realized she didn't know whose name the water bill was under. The call came mid-morning, just as Mark was finishing a run. He let it buzz twice before answering, breathing steady, towel over his shoulder. His daughter's name lit up the screen. Emily, in her usual no-nonsense font. He almost smiled. Emily never called without a reason. Hey, sweetheart, he said, wiping sweat from his neck. Her voice was gentle but edged. Hey, Dad, do you have a minute? He did. He always did for her. Of course. There was a pause, then, Mom says you're freezing her out, that you're treating her like the enemy. Mark let the words sit a moment before responding. I'm not punishing her, he said carefully. I'm just finished pretending we're something we're not. Emily didn't respond right away. He could hear cars in the background, maybe her apartment window cracked open. I mean, she said finally, she sounded pretty upset. Mark nodded to himself. She's upset because I didn't give her the performance she rehearsed for. That's not cruelty, Em. That's restraint. Another pause. Longer this time. Did you two talk about any of this before? She asked. We talked, Mark said. Or at least I did. She smiled, nodded, and changed the subject. Emily sighed. You always stayed so calm. Maybe she thought you weren't unhappy. She thought I was wallpaper, but I was a mirror. There was a faint laugh on the other end. Surprised, maybe even impressed. Emily had always thought of him as solid, predictable, but not dull. She had his quiet temperament, but none of her mother's flair for theater. I guess that explains the canceled check I found in Mom's drawer, Emily muttered. She was trying to send me airfare for a visit. Mark raised an eyebrow. You're not coming? No, I told her she needs space. He didn't expect that. That's mature of you. I've seen enough growing up. I can spot a mess when it's still wearing makeup and pretending it's a party. Mark smiled faintly. You're smarter than we were at your age. Maybe. Or just tired of the noise. When they hung up, he sat in the shade of the porch, watching a cardinal flick its wings near the bird bath. The quiet wasn't lonely. It was earned. Julia found out 2 days later. She was pacing near the dining room window, phone pressed tight against her ear. Her eyes darted as Emily spoke. Short, clipped replies Julia wasn't used to. She kept turning, hoping to spot a crack in the conversation. None came. Then, "Fine," Julia snapped. "Enjoy your silence." Click. She stared at the phone for a moment like it had betrayed her. Then, in a single motion, she flung it across the room. It hit the wall with a thud, bounced off a canvas print of a Tuscany vineyard, the one Mark had always hated, and landed in a ceramic bowl filled with unused potpourri. The silence that followed wasn't cinematic. It was clinical, like an empty hotel room after checkout. She stood there, jaw clenched, waiting for Mark to walk in and ask what was wrong. He didn't. He was out. Not physically. He was in the garage, organizing old tools by function, not by how they looked in a drawer. But he was gone in all the ways that mattered. Julia picked up the phone. Cracked screen, battery blinking red. She scrolled to Emily's messages. The last one was curt. "Mom, you need time. I'll visit when things settle." No emojis, no soft sign-offs. Even her daughter was stepping away. Not with drama, but with that same quiet precision Mark had always wielded. And for the first time, Julia realized the house wasn't empty because people left. It was empty because they'd stopped coming back. She sat down at the edge of the couch, hands limp in her lap, staring at the wall like it might blink first. No tears, no speeches, just a woman alone in a room full of choices she made and consequences she never thought would arrive. In the hallway, the antique clock ticked on, still working, still keeping time, just not for her anymore. Courtrooms smell like paper and anxiety, the beige walls, the hum of fluorescent lighting, the squeak of shoes on vinyl. It all hums with quiet dread. Julia sat at the plaintiff's table, crisp in a charcoal suit she'd borrowed from a boutique friend. Her heels tapped the floor like a metronome of control. Across from her, Mark sat motionless, suit unremarkable, expression unreadable. Not smug enough to gloat, but too still, like a man who already knew the outcome. Her attorney, Gavin, straightened his tie a third time. He'd been confident a week ago. Cocky even. "We'll go for equitable distribution. You're entitled to half of everything, Julia. Maybe more, depending on his response." Now Gavin's eyes darted toward the opposing table with the unease of a man preparing for surgery with the wrong tools. "Your Honor," he said, rising to his feet, "we're requesting full and immediate disclosure of all marital assets, investment accounts, retirement funds, property titles, business interests, trust documents, and any known offshore accounts. As of this filing, we have not received adequate transparency from Mr. Garrison's legal counsel." Across the aisle, Mark's lawyer, a woman named Val Sinclair, didn't stand immediately. She flipped open her folder with deliberate ease like this was a grade school presentation. "Your Honor," she said, rising, "we anticipated this motion and have prepared full documentation for the court's review." She handed the bailiff a thick, bound folder. No binder clips, no messy printouts. Every page numbered, every signature visible, every transfer date time-stamped. The judge opened it. The room fell into that hushed hum only courthouses can produce. Muffled breath, shifting chairs, the faint scribble of a clerk's pen. Page after page, the judge flipped. Transferred, retitled, shielded, irrevocable. Gavin leaned toward Julia, whispering, "These are pre-separation." "What?" she hissed. Val spoke again, voice clear and surgical. "All transfers were executed no less than 6 months prior to Mrs. Garrison's divorce request. Properly documented, properly notarized. The LLCs are all in good standing, and the trusts have independent beneficiaries, none of which include Mrs. Garrison." Julia stood abruptly. "But he knew I was going to file. He knew." The judge glanced at her, then back to Mark. "Mr. Garrison," he said, "were you aware your wife was considering divorce when these asset transfers were made?" Mark stood, buttoning his jacket. "I suspected, Your Honor." "Did she inform you directly?" "No, sir." "And your intent in shifting these assets?" Mark looked directly at Julia, not with malice, just clean detachment. "To simplify what I assumed was inevitable, and to ensure that my retirement, which I built before our marriage, remained protected." The judge looked back at the file, fingers tapping lightly on the edge of the bench. "These documents are airtight," he said, almost to himself. Gavin's voice cracked slightly.
He moved everything before she even filed. He anticipated. Yes, the judge interrupted. He was preparing. Julia sat down hard. The words stuck in her ears. Preparing.
Like a soldier laying out weapons while the other side was still printing banners. Mark returned to his seat without a glance back. Gavin scrambled, trying to shift tone. We'd like to contest the legality of the timing. You can file, counselor, the judge said flatly, but this court isn't in the business of punishing preparation, especially not when the paperwork is this thorough. The gavel didn't slam. There was no courtroom drama crescendo, just silence, and the gentle thump of the judge closing the folder. Julia leaned toward Gavin, whispering like a drowning person asking if there's still air above. We can undo this, right? Gavin didn't answer right away, and that, more than anything, told her what she needed to know. She turned to look at Mark. He didn't smirk. He didn't shift. He simply stared at the floor like a man waiting for the elevator to reach his floor. Not defeated, not defensive, just done. The mediation room had no windows. Just beige walls, stale coffee, and the kind of artificial calm that makes your skin itch. The mediator, a woman in her late 50s with soft eyes and a hard spine, offered tea neither of them accepted. Julia sat rigid in a tailored blazer, arms crossed so tightly it looked like she was holding herself together by force. Mark, across the table, had the demeanor of a man waiting to renew a passport. Still, neutral, dead calm. A file sat between them, unopened. The mediator cleared her throat. Mr. Garrison, you wanted to make an offer directly. Mark nodded once. He opened the file, slid a packet across the table to Julia's side. She didn't touch it, just stared. It's simple, he said. You keep the house in Hillside, the one your parents gave us after the wedding. You keep the Audi, the art collection in the guest room, and you're released from any future claim to my estate. Julia's jaw clenched. You mean I release you? Mark raised a brow. Sure, if it helps you feel in control. She leaned forward. And what do you get? He met her eyes, voice flat. Silence. Finality. No further contact. No appeals. No drama. The mediator looked between them, then down at her notepad. To clarify, Mr. Garrison, this would mean Mrs. Garrison receives the property, the vehicle, and those contents, and no spousal support? No support, no alimony, no claim on my pension or trusts. She walks clean. Julia let out a sharp laugh, too loud for the room. This is petty. You think giving me scraps from my own life is generous? No, Mark replied without blinking. I think it's quiet. She stared at him like she was seeing him for the first time. And in a way, she was. The man she thought would unravel had not only stayed intact, he'd vanished behind legal lines and paperwork, emerging on the other side like a man who'd already mourned her and moved on, not to someone new, but to somewhere she couldn't follow. She tried to find the holes. And what if I don't agree? What if I contest it all? Mark shrugged lightly. You'll burn more in legal fees than you'll win. The judge already sided with the documentation. You'll get less than what I'm offering. This way, at least, you keep the house. Your name still means something in that neighborhood. Julia went silent. Her eyes flicked to the mediator, then to the papers. The math was sound. The emotional math, less so. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. Denise had promised that by now he'd be broken, offering vacations, therapy, apologies. She was supposed to be in control, the storm that changed everything, not the aftermath left sorting through debris. And yet, here she was, being offered exactly what she had once imagined she'd demand. Only now, it felt like a consolation prize. You're cutting me out, she whispered. Mark's reply was immediate, cool. You already left. I'm just updating the records. Julia's throat tightened. She hated the feeling that she wasn't the protagonist in this anymore, that he had rewritten the script without her. You really think this makes you the better person? No, Mark said. It makes me the finished one. She stood up abruptly, chair legs scraping the floor like a scream. Keep your damn silence. She walked out without taking the file. Mark didn't move. The mediator, scribbling notes, asked quietly, Should I follow her? No, Mark said, looking at the file still sitting between them. She'll be back. And in that sterile room, with its hollow light and the scent of legal ink, he waited. Not for her to change her mind, but for her to realize it was the only one she had left. The message came on a Wednesday morning, buried under shopping discount emails and some chain forward from a distant cousin. Julia almost deleted it out of habit until she caught the sender's name, Denise Harper. No subject line, just a single sentence inside. Martin filed. It's happening. Julia stared at it for a full minute before blinking. She read it again, then a third time. Martin, Denise's husband, filed. Denise was getting divorced? The woman who'd called marriage a power seat and bragged for years about how she'd trained Martin like a dog to fetch and flatter. Julia called her instantly, straight to voicemail. She texted, "What's going on? You didn't tell me anything." No reply. Hours passed. By the time evening hit, Julia was pacing the kitchen like she had during her early pregnancy nausea. The difference now? Back then, she'd been excited. Now she just felt sick. The next day, Mark passed her in the driveway. He was loading bags into his trunk, probably heading to his lawyer's office or maybe to the storage unit she never knew he had until the discovery phase. "Did you hear about Denise?" she snapped, unable to hide the bite in her voice. Mark looked up, nodded. "I did. She used me," Julia blurted. "Pushed me to blow up everything while she was negotiating her own exit." Mark didn't smirk, didn't say "I told you so." He just loaded the last bag into the trunk, shut it gently, and said, "You let her." That was it. No lecture, no pity, just the cold, unvarnished truth, and it hit harder than anything he could have shouted. She turned away, lips tight. That night, she barely slept. Her thoughts were barbed wire, Denise's advice replaying, Mark's silence echoing, Emily's absence expanding like a cold vacuum in the house. The next week, she filed a motion. It was a last-ditch effort, but she felt cornered. Her lawyer had warned her it was a long shot, but Julia insisted. Contest the trust transfers, claim fraudulent intent, argue that Mark shielded assets in anticipation of the divorce, that he knew. Gavin filed it, probably for the invoice, not the confidence. In court, it took less than 20 minutes. The judge, same one from before, flipped through the filings with mild annoyance, as if she'd interrupted his lunch. "These trusts were established a year prior to the date of separation," he said flatly. "They are legally structured, transparently executed, and predate any formally documented conflict." Gavin cleared his throat. "But, Your Honor, the spirit of—" "The court doesn't deal in spirits, counselor," the judge interrupted. "We deal in documents, and his are flawless." He closed the file. Motion denied. Julia didn't stand, didn't speak. She just sat there blinking, like someone who missed a stare in the dark and was still trying to understand why the ground hit back. Outside the courtroom, the air felt thicker. Her suit itched. She pulled at the collar like it was choking her. Mark walked past with Val, his attorney, nodding politely at Gavin but not acknowledging Julia at all. He didn't have to. She wasn't part of this story anymore. And that's when it sank in. Denise had used her to jump first, shield herself, get ahead. Julia had walked into fire thinking it was a bonfire party, laughing, wine in hand, burning everything behind her without checking if she had a way forward. Now she was alone. No legal wins, no property leverage, no daughter visiting. And her friend, the one who whispered the divorce was a power move, was playing the victim in her own freshly drafted proceedings. Julia stood outside the courthouse in stiff heels, watching a couple exit hand in hand. The woman leaned into her husband's shoulder, laughing. That used to be Julia. 10 years ago, 20. Now she was just a woman blinking in the sun, wondering how so many choices could look like control, right up until they weren't. The conference room was quiet, but not tense. Just finished. The kind of stillness that comes after the last item on a checklist is crossed off. Julia sat across from Mark, the final settlement in front of her, a Mont Blanc pen resting by her hand, one she'd bought for him years ago, back when she still thought expensive meant meaningful. She stared at the line marked signature, like it might vanish if she just waited long enough. It didn't. Across the table, Mark adjusted the cuff of his shirt, not checking his watch, not tapping his foot, just sitting. Present, but no longer involved, like a guest politely waiting for a taxi. The mediator, a soft-spoken woman with thick glasses and patience like stone, nodded once. "Whenever you're ready, Mrs. Garrison." Julia picked up the pen. Her signature didn't hesitate. That surprised her. It came out neat, legible, the way she used to write checks for charity events, back when she thought their names mattered in the town paper. She capped the pen slowly, then looked up. "It doesn't have to end like this," she said quietly. Mark didn't react right away. He folded the document, slid it back across the table, then met her eyes, calm as glass. "It already did," he said. "We're just filing the paperwork." She swallowed. "We could—" "No," he cut in, not unkind, but firm. "No more lies. No more scenes." Julia's throat tightened. "You think I lied to you the whole time?" He didn't answer that. He didn't need to. Instead, he stood, adjusted his coat, and turned to go. She rose with him, instinctively, wanting to say something, fix something, hold on to something. "Mark," she started, but he held up a hand without turning around. Not aggressive, not rude, just done. She stopped mid-sentence. The words fell back into her throat and stayed there like stones. He walked out of the room, his steps unhurried, like a man leaving a hotel room that wasn't his anymore. No look back, no hesitation. Later that evening, the house was quiet when he returned. Not their house, his house now, legally, officially. The silence didn't feel heavy. It felt earned. He walked into the bedroom. Her side of the closet was still open, some empty hangers swinging faintly, a blouse she left behind dangling on a hook. He reached up and gently closed the door. No slamming, no symbolic gesture, just the soft click of wood meeting wood, like a chapter ending without applause. He sat down on the edge of the bed, pulled off his shoes. The window was cracked slightly. Outside, he could hear the wind brushing through the trees, the same sound that had once made Julia smile when they first bought this place. She used to say it sounded like the house was breathing. Now she'd be sleeping in the house she'd grown up in, the one her parents left her. It was hers again, officially. She got what she wanted, at least, what she thought she wanted. And he didn't feel triumphant, just clear. He leaned back against the headboard, staring at the ceiling, letting the quiet settle around him. There had been no final fight, no emotional crescendo, just a signature and a hand held up to stop the noise before it started. It wasn't peace, exactly, but it was something close. It was the end. It was one of those spring evenings that begged to be remembered. Soft breeze, golden light, the scent of cut grass and overwatered flower beds. Julia stood at the edge of the neighborhood cul-de-sac, a glass of wine she didn't want in her hand, making tight small talk with people she used to impress, people who used to envy her. Now they just smiled politely, warm but distant, the way you'd smile at someone in a waiting room, courteous but not invested. The homeowner, Carol, leaned in midway through a conversation about community garden renovations and said, "Did you hear what Mark did?" Julia's spine stiffened before she could stop it. "Mark?" Carol nodded, swirling her Chardonnay like the news wasn't about to split the world open. "Big donation. Veterans Housing Project upstate. Quiet but generous. My husband says it's all in a foundation now." Another woman chimed in from behind the cheese tray. "Yep, Garrison Trust. No one saw it coming. Not flashy, just final." Julia's wine glass hovered near her lips. "Wait, he gave it away? All of it?" "Most, from what I hear," said Carol. "He didn't keep the rental properties or the brokerage funds, liquidated them, put the entire package under the nonprofit. Apparently, his daughter helped file the paperwork." Julia blinked. "Emily?" "Mm-hmm. She's on the board, runs the administration." Someone chuckled. "You never really know people, do you?" That one stung more than she let on. She stayed for 10 more minutes, just enough to avoid suspicion. Then she handed Carol the untouched wine, smiled a little too brightly, and slipped away down the street with her purse clutched too tightly under her arm. She walked home in silence, passing the same houses she used to show off during dinner parties. The tree-lined sidewalks that once framed a life built on curated impressions, a marriage that looked good from the outside, tasteful lighting, the right car, perfect seasonal wreaths, but was already hollow when she thought she still owned the story. Inside her home, the air felt wrong, not stale, just off, too still. The living room smelled faintly of furniture polish, like someone had cleaned for guests who never came. She sat on the edge of the sofa, pulled off her heels, stared at the bookshelf across the room. There was a photo of her and Mark from 10 years ago. Napa, a wine tour. She was wearing that straw hat she thought made her look mysterious. He had one hand on her shoulder, eyes squinting against the sun. She hadn't thrown the picture out. Not yet, maybe because deep down she hadn't thought it was over. Maybe she thought time would unravel his calm and make him reach out, explain, regret, but he hadn't. Instead, he'd erased her name from the paper trail, and from the narrative, he'd given it all away, not to another woman, not even to himself, but to something permanent, something that would live past him and past them and their daughter, the same girl Julia thought would eventually come around. She wasn't circling back. She was building something new with him. Julia leaned back on the couch, staring at the ceiling, trying to remember the last thing she'd said to Mark that hadn't been a tactic, a jab, or a lie. She couldn't. The walls felt thinner now. The whole house did, like insulation had been stripped from the bones of the place, leaving nothing but a hollow echo where a marriage used to live. Mark didn't just leave her. He left her story, took the best chapters with him, and wrote a new ending she wasn't in.